Hello and welcome to um, another video on AP English language. Today we're going to be examining rhetorical devices. So first off, what are rhetorical devices? Rhetorical devices are also known as rhetorical strategies or literary elements. They're used in practically all literature. Sometimes it can even be unintentional, as writers may have included certain elements or strategy or devices in their writing without even meaning to do so. These rhetorical devices can serve as a selling point for authors when they're making an argument, in that these devices can help convince their audience to join their author's cause or join with the author or subscribe to their cause. Generally, every rhetorical device can be categorized into pathos, ethos, or logos, which we discussed in the last video. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the more relevant, or I guess necessary, rhetorical devices that I believe are necessary for you to know. So first off, we're going to start with pathos. So the first device we'll be talking about is anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of a clause. The authors can use it to emphasize a certain point. Sometimes they can do this by clarifying the significance or meaning of a certain thing that they're discussing by using anaphora to list certain characteristics of that thing they're discussing. So I wanted to talk about a specific example. So it would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at the March on Washington in 1963. He says, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." So here, Dr. King repeats the phrase "I have a dream" multiple times throughout his speech, as he depicts what his ideal vision of a future would be, where people are not judged based on the color of their skin. Yeah. He repeats the phrase "I have a dream" to emphasize that this vision he describes as futuristic, in that dreams are not reality, and is to list certain characteristics of the future he holds, which he hopes for, which he discusses. I just wanted to give a specific example for anaphora because it might be a little bit unclear since it's not as common as some of the other ones. All right, so next up we have piling. So piling is a listing of a series of items in a quick succession in an effort to overwhelm the audience, which the author will do. The audience is meant to be a little bit surprised, or just to be surprised in general, as to the many effects or specific things that there are to a certain action. For an example, the speaker might list the many different negative impacts that a certain action might have, which they are campaigning against. Next up, we have imagery. So, imagery is used to create an image with words for the audience. It can help the audience to imagine an abstract situation that they might typically be unable to understand. In it, that it might be a very specific, situation that the common person that might be listening to the speech would be unable to understand. For example, like a doctor could be talking about a specific surgery they had and specific procedures that they had to perform, which obviously people will not just understand if they say, I had to perform a blank surgery. Next up, we have diction or word choice. This is a very, I guess, very, very general rhetorical device. There are definitely a lot of more specific devices that are technically under the umbrella of diction. So diction or word choice is a specific choice of words that the author uses in an effort to convey a specific meaning to the audience. Like I said, there are many different types of diction that are more specific. These include connotation, which is the implicit meaning of a word or word. Denotation, the dictionary definition of a word. Inclusive language, among many other types. Well, and I wanted to highlight inclusive language is something that I believe that I tend to use a lot because it's very easy to find and easier to analyze. In my opinion, diction is a very reliable rhetorical device to analyze because pretty much every single piece of literature contains some sort of diction to a certain degree, where some might have a lot of diction that is specific to the author, but others might be very scientific or not as much as the author's voice in it, but still have some level of diction. I wanted to say that I pretty much use diction as a whole, or word choice, or something under that umbrella, that very large umbrella that it encompasses, to analyze in pretty much every single one of my rhetorical analysis essays that I've written throughout the course of my year in this class. And then the next one is appeal to. So I didn't really specify what appeal they were talking about because there's a bunch, but there's definitely a specific type of an appeal that can only apply, or that generally applies to just pathos. So an author can use appeal to target specific characteristics or feelings that the audience may have. Now these can change based on every different type of speech or different audience. So like I said, there are many different types of appeals, which include but are not limited to religion or identity or patriotism, which are similar in that generally when they're talking about the identity, it could be talking about the identity as like an American citizen. So it also ties in with patriotism. Of course, there are many different other appeals to a certain thing. Emotions could be another one. But I believe that these are generally the most common ones that can be easily analyzed, and that they're generally very clear when they do exist in a certain piece of writing. Next up, I'm going to talk about ethos, which is generally like reasoning. So first off, I wanted to start by talking about concessions. So concessions are when an author will discuss counter arguments, fears, or doubts that may exist. Generally, when an author uses concessions, they will use specific phrases such as "I'll admit," "though I may be arguing this, there is also that." Other phrases can include however, people may say this, I believe, or it is true, also true that. You can say, in spite of the sentiment that endorses blank, the other side of the argument, which the author, might be arguing, holds more true. Something like that. There's a very those are some, I guess, common phrases you should look for. That will definitely be specific to concessions. However, pretty much concessions can be made in any single way, any different way that the author might specifically choose to do so. So next up, we have juxtaposition. This is a bit more familiar, I hope, for more people. So juxtaposition is when the author will compare two things side by side. They'll do this in an effort to emphasize the various similarities and or differences between these two things that they choose to talk about. So they might, it's kind of like a simile. No, not a simile. It's similar to like an analogy, so that like I talked about in the imagery slide, an author might choose to talk about something very specific to a specific field and compare it to something that the general public will be able to understand and just be able to connect with the author's argument more, in that they'll actually understand what the author is talking about in a sense, because kind of vicariously through that concept that they understand. I mean, I guess I could use a doctor example again. They could compare surgery to like a puzzle or something. I'm not familiar with what doctors do, but it's an effort, I guess. So the next one I wanted to talk about under ethos is repercussions. So the repercussions are generally when the author discusses extreme effects or consequences that a certain action may have. The author can emphasize that though the repercussions have not set in as of yet, they will definitely happen in due time. An example would be how people who advocate against or advocate that global warming is in fact a thing, and that it's not just something that has been conjured up and to spread a political agenda. They might say how, oh, in a couple decades, like something like the lion or the zebra will be completely wiped out, and that's definitely a very far-reaching consequence of not stopping global warming, and people are going to be able to understand that because people are very familiar with the ideas of just seeing lions and zebras just at zoos, and it will be very foreign, and it will be very very humbling for people to understand that if global warming is not stopped, those seeming normalities will suddenly become just things of the past. So that's it for the ethos, and now we're going to talk about the logos, some of the logos rhetorical devices that I believe are pretty important. First off, I guess the very easier common one is data and statistics. Specifically, the authors can provide specific numbers and facts that the audience can only agree with. An example would be, like, a lot of people do like to argue. I think Ben Shapiro specifically, I believe I've seen videos of him talking about how though African Americans make up just 12% of the population, they commit 50% of the violent crime in the nation, which I think he uses as a counter argument or rebuttal to, I guess, certain issues with the police and African American people. Next up, we have appeal to authority. So the author can refer to the opinion or testimony of an expert in a certain field who agrees with the author's stance or just has a stance that is relevant. I guess an easy example or a good example would be news shows. News anchors don't necessarily always talk about specific topics. They have experts that they rely on to help explain certain concepts that they might not be qualified to discuss. I think a good example would be CNN. They have a Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and I think he talks about general, like, I guess the medical side of news, and he helps to helps readers to understand, I guess in a dumbed down way almost, the medical situations that may be going on. Last but not least, of course, there are a lot more. We have Anecdote. So an anecdote is a personal account of a past experience that the author will share. For example, the speaker is talking about a time where they were directly impacted by the issue at hand. Yes, this is pretty self-explanatory. It's like anecdote means the same thing as a story, and authors will just present stories or personal stories to just show the audience that they are actually very well related to the issue. All right. Obviously, there are a lot more rhetorical devices that span across pathos, ethos, logos, and even outside of that. But I just felt like these were a couple that are pretty important, and I wanted you guys to really grasp before we started doing anything further. Obviously, you don't have to use these, but I do recommend them as they're usually pretty relevant in a lot of the literature that you'll analyze in AP English Language and Composition, for specifically the rhetorical analysis section of the exam. All right, so that's it from me for today. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, I'll definitely refer to the description below, as there's several links. And yeah, all right, thank you for watching. Bye.